Hello, everybody. This is Taz Street with Positive Out Loud. Today we have a very awesome guest here. We have Rachel Izzo. She is somebody that I met at the urgent care at Kaiser Permanente. Yes. So I think it me and my wife that came and saw you? Okay. Yeah, we both came and saw, I forget who was me. I think it was my wife that was being
Yeah,
seen, but we happened to be there together. And then for some reason, Dr. Joe came up
yeah.
and we
It was
both realized,
actually because of these earrings. That's why.
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I recognize the earrings. I'm like, oh, this is a cool nurse right here. So we started talking about Dr. Joe and how we have gone to the week-long events and how we're really into meditation. And I think we totally forgot about Rachel and what she was.
Yeah. That's true.
But anyway, I wanted to bring her on the show because she is really into meditation and healing and into Dr. Joe. She's a nurse that's been practicing in the emergency room for many years now. She has a degree in exercise science. She's really into working out and being fit. And she's also had quite the journey of healing herself through the meditations, which I thought was really phenomenal. And I also wanted to talk about what it's like being a nurse during COVID as well, because that's going to be pretty tough. And and just talk about your journey and where you came from and where you're going and what's going on in your life. So let's talk a little bit about. Let's start with what was it like when you were having some health issues, and what kind of things did you try that weren't working?
Yeah. I want to mention real quick first when we
Yeah.
first met. I wanted to say because it was so funny. I had just gotten back from Cancun, which was a week-long workshop, and I was having a really hard time kind of coming back into the regular world. And I thought it was so funny because I was wearing the earrings, and it's what sparked the conversation. And I was talking about it, and your wife, Rachel, was like, "Well, you talk about Dr. Joe," and I was like, what? So I wanted to just, touch on that because it was, for me, it was a really fun moment. And
Hmm.
that was just, I think I loved how we met and everything. It was a great moment to kind of full circle connect everything. But to answer your question, I have quite an extensive story. And I almost divide up my story into kind of different sections of things that I've dealt with. The first kind of part started in 2009 when I had an injury. I had some sort of injury. I don't know what it was. It's from weightlifting. But I also had a lot of and now I know the tie of emotions into physical conditions in the body. I had an emotional event happen around that same time, and it started basically a downhill spiral of chronic pain and issues. And it started out as a normal injury. Led into kind of full body pain. I was an athlete. I had to stop everything. I was training 6 days a week. I stopped everything. I had to stop everything completely. And then I had some trauma along the side. And so my body just kept doing all these very weird things. Lots of symptoms, I had the pain. I had a lot of anxiety, sleep issues. And I always felt like something was wrong with me and I wanted to be fixed. And what do we learn about medicine is that we go to the doctor and they fix us, right? And
Hmm.
I distinctly remember the moment. It was very, very distinct. It was 2011. So at this point, I'd been dealing with this stuff for about 2 years. And that was 2011 was kind of where the worst of it was. And I went to this shoulder doctor, the shoulder specialist outside of Seattle. Wasn't in Seattle, I was in Bellevue. And because I was still fixated on the body. And I remember distinctly, my mom was actually there for this appointment as well, that he told me that I should go on antidepressants. And that's why I was in pain, because I was depressed, and that
Oh my
it would
God.
probably help me.
Oh.
And I remember at that moment, that was the moment where I was like, F this, I'm done. Like, this is not the
Hmm.
answer. And I didn't know anything about mind body stuff. I didn't believe in the mind body connection. I was like the most type A, like, analytical person out there. I'd never meditated before, but that was the precise moment where I was like, okay, I need to find something else. So I started doing some research, and initially I found I still was fixated on the body, and that because I felt physical pain. So I was like, well, there's something wrong with my body, right?
Hmm.
And I found some techniques that started to dive into a little bit of the mind body connection, and I had found
Wait, before you go on, how much pain were you in?
I couldn't, I mean, it was extraordinary. I'm thankfully, I'm so far removed from that now.
Mm.
I could not move my neck at all. Like I could probably turn my neck like 5 degrees. So like all my neck muscles in my upper back were like in spasm. I had all these trigger points. They felt like hot all the time. I would put Tiger Balm so much on my skin that I burned my skin, and I had
Mm.
this rash that would break out. I had hurt my back. What also was happening, so between 2009 and then 2011, what happened was that I had initially the pain started as like an injury, like I said, but what happened was like I would get injured and things would get stuck. It was like it was stuck in my body. So I hurt my back with like normal weightlifting stuff. I would get injured, but then stuff would stay and be stuck. So I had all this pain. Most of it was my upper body, my shoulders were in, like just my entire upper torso. I couldn't move my arms more than like 45 degrees, probably away from my body, just because everything up here was in pain. When I walked across the street, I would have to like turn my whole body, and I can't turn my neck all the way because I'm just sore, but that's from working out. But I would have to like turn my whole body because I couldn't move my neck. My roommate in college, she brought this up a couple of years ago as a, remembering what it was like. I couldn't carry a purse because even just a small little pressure on my shoulders here would cause pain. So I would carry my phone in my bra. So, I mean, I do that now, but just because I want to, not because I have to. So I went from being like almost an elite level athlete. I was in 2009, I had won, or I qualified for every national meet as a competitive weightlifter. To nothing. I couldn't work out at all. I was walking, which, I could still get outside and walk, which was great. But I played soccer, lacrosse, gymnastics. I did CrossFit, weightlifting. I did activity my whole life. I hiked, I camped, I backpacked. All that was gone. So this was 2011, and it was obviously a very, very low point, and I just didn't understand. And that specific moment where the doctor was like, you need to go on antidepressants, I was like, I'm done. Like this is not, clearly this is not working. And it was
Well, you were unhappy because everything that you known is gone. I mean,
well,
that's
yeah,
the
and
reason you were unhappy.
and he was saying basically I'm in pain because I'm depressed. And I was like, well, of course I'm depressed because I can't do anything.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not the cause of what's going on. And I really, it was like, oh wow, I have to completely approach this at a different angle. And I was never a part of a meditation community. I never sought mind body. I never seen a chiropractor. I never seen a massage therapist. I never seen
So
acupuncture.
you didn't do physical therapy, anything for this, or?
I did
Okay.
initially, but like again, everything was focused on the body and like different body parts, and there was nothing that was working. I saw a chiropractor. I mean, I did see all those people, but nothing was
Mhm.
working.
Mm.
So I don't know how, I don't remember what I initially started researching, but I found something called associative awareness technique. And it's the first technique that was actually used by a lot of by this physical therapists are certified in it, but it was the first modality that I found that brought the mind body connection together. So I started reading about it, and I said, okay, this is something that, maybe could help me, because it seems like that there's something bigger going on, that it's not just an injury anymore. It's a whole body thing. And at this point, I found a physical therapist who did this technique, who also did some other things, who was in New York. And at the time, I really wanted to move to New York. I loved New York. I was determined to move to New York at some point. So I went for like a week to visit, and I saw this guy like every day. And it started working with the nervous system and calming the nervous system down, because what he taught me is that fight or flight continues the nervous system response that results in trauma kind of being stuck in the body.
Mhm.
And he had talked about, I'd seen clients on, testimonials of videos that I talked about how they were in chronic pain and came out of it. So my research really was like, how do I heal chronic pain, essentially? I saw some mild improvements with that. Very, very mild. But I did notice that there was some shifts. And then I was like, oh, I can't. I was living in Seattle. I can't, like, there was no one in Seattle that did it. I was like, I can't keep flying back and forth to New York. And I was like, I'm still missing something. Something's not there. I was getting a little bit better, but it wasn't fully there. So I started researching some more, and I found another physical therapist who was in Colorado, that also did this technique, but I did some other things as well. And then he had seen some patients like me who had a multitude of issues that no one could kind of figure out and solve. And he was colleagues with a life coach who kind of tackled the mental aspect of it. So he suggested I come out and see them there in Colorado, he and his colleague. And I did that, and I went for 10 days, and it was like a healing boot camp essentially. And I bless my parents for spending the money to do this, because it cost a lot of money. But I went out and they treated me. I was probably getting different treatments for like 4 hours a day. So 2 hours of very much physical hands-on technique of the physical therapist. He had some techniques that were very much hands-on, that were like we're addressing the body, but we're addressing, it's called PRRT, primal reflex release technique. And the idea behind it is that when we have trauma, our body does certain mechanisms that are physical reflexes. And if you get stuck in this fight or flight pattern, your body gets stuck in this tension pattern. So like when you jump back, you shrug your shoulders up or something like that. And what can happen is that these muscular patterns get stuck in the body, and this physical therapy technique actually undoes that. It's very interesting. I didn't know anything about it, but again, I learned about it through him.
Mm-hmm.
So he started doing that. He was doing physical stuff on me, and also this associative awareness technique. And then the life coach was kind of hitting me from the emotional aspect of it. I had some trauma and I hadn't really dealt with it. So she was kind of dealing with that part of it. And at the end of I was there for about 10 days. This is 2012 at this point. I could run up a flight of stairs. I could run around a field with a soccer ball, which I couldn't even do. Like I could not do at all. So I had made tremendous progress. For me, that was tremendous. Running around the field with a soccer ball was an incredible process at that point. But I went back to Seattle, and then I found that it was so up and down, like a roller coaster. If I'd have a horrendous flare up of pain or something would, my neck would go out, my back would go out, whatever. And I was like, what am I missing here? Why am I not making progress? And I remember distinctly this life coach said, your body is okay. It's the mind that we have to work on. And then she said, I want you to get this book. And it was Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself.
All right. Yeah.
And she said, I want you to read it cover to cover. So this associative awareness technique that I'd done with the physical therapist had a little bit of meditation built in, but like not really. And the physical therapist that I worked with in Colorado had introduced me to something called the amygdala retraining technique, and talked about the limbic brain system and how when we get stuck in fight or flight, it causes a whole bunch of issues. So he had started working with me on that. And I'd done a couple of small, like short meditations, but I really had never meditated. So I'm reading this book and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? Like, and I was
He's in Seattle, right? He was in Seattle.
Oh yeah. So what happened was that I was reading the book and I was like, okay. And I liked his approach because it was scientific, and I'm a sciencey person. I need like hard facts, and I liked his approach to the way he was describing stuff in his book. And it was very relatable, because when you get sick with something or you have a condition, you eventually associate your whole identity with it. And he talks about why that reinforces things that we don't want, and how do we break that so that we can heal. And about halfway through the book, I flipped to his bio, and read his bio. I was like, oh, he's a chiropractor in Olympia, like just south of me. Mm-hmm. So at the time he was still practicing. So I called up the clinic and I said, hey, are you taking new patients? And because I had physical pain, they took me on as a patient. So I became a patient of his. So I went down there in 2012, and we still laugh about this, but Joe has told me that when I walked in, I had a rain cloud hanging over my head, like only me. Like, what's the character in Charlie Brown that has like?
Oh yeah.
Or
the
like
kid that's always dirty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that was like me, but with like my emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I met him. I started seeing him as a patient, and then I was actually going to Colorado for a couple of weeks in the summertime to see the other PT. But then the life coach was like, well, oh my gosh, you should just stay in Seattle and go see Joe. I said, no, I've already had this planned out. So I started reading, Joe's book, and I didn't know really anything about it, but I met him and he treated me physically. And when I went to Colorado, I started doing the meditations a little bit. And, really it was about becoming more aware of my thoughts. The other thing that I had started doing with this team in Colorado, that's, they're still great friends to this day, was something called TREs, trauma releasing exercises.
Oh, I've done that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that. Hmm.
fantastic. And sometimes I still do it occasionally.
Hmm.
With, if I have a stressful day and you just kind of hold tension, that was a tremendous part of the initial kind of step in getting some of the pain out of my body.
But before you move on, though, I have an interesting story. So when I
Yeah.
was in the week long in Canada, Dr. Joe event, I was just introduced to trauma release exercises right before that. And I would do it, I did it, and I remember shaking and that sort of thing. But I remember one night I was sleeping in the Airbnb. I think it was like the third or fourth night into the week. And I heard this like huge alarm, like ambulance outside, and really woke me out of my sleep. And and I thought somebody was knocking on the door, but they weren't. But anyway, and my stomach was just like in pain. So I went to the bathroom, I came back, and my whole body was just started shaking out of the blue. I mean, I wasn't doing the extra
Yeah.
trauma release exercises or anything. This just started happening. I think just from doing all the meditations
Yeah.
and going deep and that sort of thing. And it did it for like 45 minutes, if you
Oh,
can believe
wow.
that. Yeah. And I was like, thank God I knew what it was.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would have thought that something was wrong with my body, right?
Well, and
So,
it's a great tool because, and for people who don't know what that is, essentially, if you look at an animal in the wild or even a kid, they have something fight or flight that happens. They're scared. You have a lion chasing a gazelle or something that is a fight or flight mechanism. And then when they're safe, they start to shake. There's a really great video out there. I'd have to find it, but it
mhm.
shows a polar bear that's being struck with a dart, a sedative for like a study or something. And then when the polar bear starts to wake up, it starts to tremble, and that's the nervous system dispelling this fight or flight energy. Well, we as humans have learned to push that down and just not deal with it. And what happens is it gets caught in the body and manifests in different stress related conditions or pain or stomach upset or whatever. So the TREs reteach the body how to release that trauma through shaking. Because what do
Yeah.
kids do? You tremble when you're scared, right? And
Mhm.
that's a
It's
mechanism.
perfectly normal. I mean,
Perfectly normal.
if you start shaking, anybody out there, if you start
Yeah.
shaking, just let it be, let it go, let's
Right.
go with the flow.
Humans, we and adults, we like blunt that response, and that's what gets us in trouble. And the person who founded it, I think at one point he wanted to take it to war torn countries to help these victims of
Mhm.
trauma, like severe war trauma, help deal with the trauma. So it's a great tool. I still use it all the time. And that was really pivotal in like the beginnings of my process. So when I came back from Colorado, I was kind of up and down, up and down, up and down. But I'd still made a tremendous physical process, or physical healing process. And then things kind of, for me, I was doing a lot more. I mean, I started hiking again. I could do a lot more. I would have what I would call flare ups, where my neck would go, my back would go, whatever it was. I had a couple injuries, and but what happened with me really in 2013, everything changed. I was sexually assaulted while I was in New York, and that started. So I'd had this healing process going on, and then I had this like horrendous trauma that happened that I would say kind of blunted or not blunted, but sidelined my healing or made it take a different avenue for quite some time because that trauma. I mean, I'm so grateful that I had tools in at the time, and I have more tools now, but I'm so glad that I had tools at the time. And I was still seeing Joe like every week as a patient, and he knew like some things that were going on and would like gently like nudge me in the right direction of like, hey, like, you need to watch your energy and this and stuff like that. But what ended up happening is that this became a 4-year long event essentially. Between the event itself, I filed a police report. The police ended up, I would say it was an abuse of power. They abused me essentially. I filed, this is all 2013, and then I filed an internal affairs report against them, which then turned into an investigation by itself, which then turned into a lawsuit. It was this whole thing.
Mm.
And what ended up happening was between 2013 and 2014 was kind of the event itself, and then it was done. But then this lawsuit, or this internal affairs investigation, became public. I had kind of let it go, and I was like, okay, I'm done with my healing. Like, I need to move on from this. And I'm going to get to the importance of that in a second. But in 2015, I got a phone call from the New York Daily News that they're airing my story tomorrow. Do you want to say anything? And I was like, what? So the problem that this created was that I had finally, 2013-14 was like the two investigations. I was done. I was still healing, and then I was in nursing school on top of it. I went to nursing school, and then all of a sudden this story comes up in this sensationalized news, and this trauma is just brought up for me again, full force. And what happened is that between 2015, it was really mostly 2015, my entire life was this trauma, between news articles coming out, deciding to do a lawsuit against the NYPD, which, I mean, I was freaking crazy I was 24, and I walked into it's funny, I walked into a law office in downtown Manhattan and was like, I want to sue the NYPD. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. But it really kind of sidelined my healing for a long time, because what ended up happening was that my entire everyday existence was surrounded by this trauma, and I became completely consumed. It was my entire identity. I identified myself as a survivor, as a victim, whatever you want to call it. And everywhere I turned, I mean, my story made front page news. Like, it was in the subways, it was on the floor. Like, I mean, it was everywhere. And then on top of it, when the lawsuit became public, because that's public knowledge, it was out there, and there was more news articles. And then I was in Manhattan where everything had happened. So it was this thing that was completely all consuming. And I had a big backslide of, I wouldn't say pain. I had some stuff pop up, but it was more my energy and my emotional state. It's like everything I learned kind of went out the window at that time. And not really. I mean, I was still meditating, but I was not conscious of who I was being, what I was putting out, because I became consumed by this identity. And it wasn't until 2016, when I had come back from a month-long trip in South Africa, and I was in Dr. Joe's office as a patient. He doesn't practice anymore, but he sat me down. He's like, we have to have a conversation about what energy you're putting out, because it's not good. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And I realized, oh my gosh, like, I have been so consumed by this for the past 3 or 4 years. And it's hard to not be when you're actively trying to do an investigation or whatever it is. It's hard to not be consumed by it. But I realized that my entire identity had become this thing that had happened. And it wasn't until 2016 when he sat me down and kind of spelled it out for me. I was like, oh wow, you're right. And after that,
you're so lucky you had Dr. Joe helping you through this whole process, one-on-one.
And I never really talked about it with him. And he kind of I think he's intuitive. He knew kind of the stuff that I was going through, but he always said the right thing at the right time. Like, and it wasn't like overbearing of like, you need to do this, but it was like, hey, like, watch your energy, sort of thing. And it was all these kind of like little gems along the way. But that was kind of a big wake up call for me. And between 2016 and 2017, I had a lot of things kind of fall away, a bunch of friendships. And a lot of it was things that I had formed during this traumatic period of my life, like friendships. And one of the most valuable things that I learned was when you are becoming a new person, things that are no longer energetically a match for you are going to fall away. And sometimes they're very, very painful. And that's what happened. Essentially, I lost a lot of things that were very important to me, friendships and stuff like that. But I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I kind of knew, but it was still painful. But I knew that had to happen in order for me to let go of this identity. And at this point, when I realized what energy I was putting out, I had a friendship fallout in like fall of 2016. And for me, that was the biggest wake up call, because I realized that this friendship had been formed solely based on my trauma. And it was keeping me stuck in this identity as a victim. And when this fell away, I was like, oh, wow, like this needed to happen. and it ends up being a happy story because he and I actually reconnected and we're very good friends again. But it fell away, and I realized how much of my identity was wrapped up in being this victim and this trauma survivor. So at that point, I had a complete shift. I stopped identifying as a survivor. Like, I mean, I didn't like, it was like I would tell everybody, not everybody, but like, I'm a survivor. Like, cancer survivors are proud of their cancer survivors. But the problem with being a survivor of anything is that you're identifying with your illness or what happened to you. And a really pivotal part in my healing was I stopped doing that. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't identify it. I left support groups. And this is, not saying that support groups are bad or therapy is bad, but what they do is that they reinforce your
Mhm.
identity as this illness or this victim, and it reinforces something that you don't want to be anymore. And a huge part of my healing was I had to get rid of all of that. And this
Mhm.
goes back to the basics of breaking the habit of being yourself. What energy are you identifying with and putting out? So I stopped all of that. I cut contact with groups of sexual assault survivors, which I still feel is very valuable and very important. But at that part of my healing process, I needed to completely disassociate with them because I was becoming that and I didn't want to be that anymore. And the biggest thing actually was leaving New York, and I had no idea how much trauma kind of had been in that place. And when I left New York, I was like, oh, okay, wow, a breath of fresh air, and really completely disassociating myself from the trauma and the identification and getting away from the news articles and, all of that. I had to stop talking about it, because all I did was become good at telling the story of what happened. It didn't actually fix anything. So that to me was the biggest point in this healing, because again, this happened while I was learning how to meditate and I was still new. And normally people find Dr. Joe or other types of work after they've been through all this and they've spent years, away from healing. I was in the middle of healing and then it happened, and it was kind of a weird shift. But again, I'm very lucky that I had the tools to deal with that. And during this time too, I started going to advanced workshops with Dr. Joe, and I had some pretty incredible experiences that showed me that I needed to let go of basically this experience in order to move forward in my life. So really what kind of, and I don't tell the story that often anymore because I honestly don't even feel that connected to it. Like, it just doesn't feel like it's relevant anymore in my life, because it used to be like the most relevant thing in my life. But I feel so distant from it, which is amazing because it for so long it was like the center of my life. And now when I tell it, I'm just like, oh, like, yeah, that happened. And I completely have cut the emotional ties to it. Which if you read it and it's out there, you can even Google it. It's pretty horrific. And it's a pretty, like, I mean, and I talked to somebody once, and he was a mentor of mine, and he was like, what you went through would have killed most people, honestly. And so for me, I mean, I'm proud of that. I'm proud that I got through that, but it doesn't even faze me anymore because I'm so, that person doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
And it was really through this process of being very aware of my energy. How am I identifying myself? How am I presenting myself to the world? What am I thinking about? What am I focusing on? Because I would realize that I was thinking about it all the time. Like, it really consumed my entire existence, and it's hard not to at that point because you went through this trauma, and of course you're going to think about it, and it's, maybe some PTSD and stuff. But you really at that point have to completely change how you associate yourself with your thoughts, even because what Joe says, which is very true, is that the universe gives you what you're being, not what you're thinking. So you can think, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm healed," all you want, but if you're not feeling that, you're not gonna get over that. And I've had this happen.
If you don't know that, right, in the core of your
Right.
being, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and because you can tell yourself like, I'm healthy, I'm free, I'm healed, I don't feel my trauma anymore. But if you're feeling, if you don't believe that and you're feeling the opposite, it doesn't make a
And
difference.
something comes up in your life and you get triggered, then you know, yeah, you're really not.
Right. And this actually, Matt, this has actually happened a couple of times. And I had a health issue that popped up 2 years ago that I realized, I was in it for like 6 months. Then I was like, oh my gosh, like, I realized that I have to completely change the way that I'm associating this kind of illness or this health problem, because I'm completely identifying with it now. And I think that's a really important part in things, and whatever you're healing, is that you have to stop identifying with your illness, because that is just keeping you stuck. And I have friends that, specifically in the sexual assault world, who have just said, well, I have PTSD for my whole life and that's how it is. And I'm like, why would you say that? Like, you don't, it doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to be, diagnosed with PTSD your whole life. Like, you don't have to have this label. And I think there's so much harm that is done, especially in young kids who are labeled as ADHD, or they're labeled as something that creates this identity for them that can follow them the rest of their lives. And labeling is so important in our society. We put so much weight on that. So of course you're going to do that to yourself. And in
Mhm.
order to heal certain things, to me, that was the biggest realization, that I had to stop in like labeling myself. It didn't matter what other people said. um it meant what I was telling myself, like, I'm a victim, or I'm injured, or I have this disease, or I have this illness. If you're telling yourself that and that's your identity, it's never going to go away.
Yeah, it's like the same process of people who are addicted to something.
Yeah.
I'm an addict, and I'm always going to be an addict. I mean,
And that's
that's
so,
like the so core belief in that. Yeah.
yeah. And that's where, and I've known people who have done both, like AA and Dr. Joe, and and I think AA is amazing, and I've
Oh,
been
it is. Yeah.
friends to meetings and stuff. But the one problem I have is that you literally identify yourself as an addict or an alcoholic.
I had to quit going to meetings personally
Yeah.
because I needed to get past that point of believing everything that they say in those meetings to
Right.
go to where I am now. Yeah.
Because you say, hello, my name is so and so, I'm an addict. And I was like, oh my God,
I
that is
hate it. After
so
a while,
deep.
I was like, I was so
Yeah.
tired of that. Yeah.
And it took me a while, and I was like, oh my gosh, I realized that that is such a problem, because you don't have to be that way forever. And if you identify yourself as that, and I'll tell a quick side story, because I think this also illustrates the point. I
I'm sure we're
have,
going to get a lot of people who are going to have a lot of comments about this, though.
but it's another important point. So, because for me, healing has not been linear at all. Like, I've
Mhm.
had, and I still, I mean, and I tell people, I'm not one, I didn't have a miraculous healing overnight. I don't need, people ask me how I healed my body, I don't even know. Like,
It's a
I
gradual process. Yeah.
it's a gradual process. I use many different things. I still struggle sometimes. I still have things that I'm working on, and I talked to my boyfriend who, he's like, you're like the 1%. I'm like, no, I'm not. And he's like, yes, you are. And I was like, okay, well, I'm 30 and I still do crazy stuff. Like, I guess that's still pretty impressive. But I still, for me, I want to get to a point, that's a little bit better than where I'm at now. I still get, occasional flare ups or whatever. But the biggest thing that I've learned is it's the reaction that you have. And that's the reaction is the refractory period. And if you can shorten your refractory period, the better you're going to do. But I tell people, I'm not one that healed overnight. I've had things heal overnight, other things that were like not that big of a deal. And that's the other thing. The more weight you put on something, the harder that you label it is to heal, that's how it's going to show up. It's going to be harder to heal because you put weight on it. I had something that I healed through a blessing of the energy centers meditation once, and I was so shocked, but I wasn't trying. And it's when you're not trying
Mhm.
when it happens. But what I
Well,
wanted to say,
that's the big word, grace, right?
yeah,
Grace can happen to us at any time. We can from
exactly.
the divine and get healed just like that. And we don't
Yeah.
like, where did that come from? It's like
And
you have to open up your heart to that, though.
exactly. And you have to be open-minded about it. And what I wanted to say in terms of the identification part, because this has been so, so, so important in everything in my life. I had, so again, it's something pretty minor. I mean, it was not minor at the time, pop up. And it was, I had this, what ended up being chronic pelvic pain for like 6 months. And what ended up happening is that I had a UTI that turned into like cystitis, which turned into my pelvic floor tightening up. And it was so painful. It was so, so painful. And it was like 6 months. And I was like, it was just because of like where it was almost as bad as like the stuff that happened in 2011. And what happened is that I
I wonder
had,
if that was part of that whole process, if it was coming up in that
well,
area,
yeah,
right?
yes and no. So it had to do with that process. And what happened is that I started dating my boyfriend. We had met at work. Um, And everyone was really happy for us at work. The managers didn't like me. This was not Kaiser. This was before Kaiser. Managers didn't like me, and they confronted me, and it was so inappropriate. Like they were so mean to me and basically bullied me about this relationship that I had formed. And I mean, it was so inappropriate, but it was a very, very like emotionally traumatic moment. And I almost quit the job on the spot. It was all the stuff. And then after that, I developed this pelvic pain. And what I realized, it was this association of like my boyfriend, and love and all that energy, whatever. So that's what we call our first and second center, right? And I had this emotional event. And then it got stuck. This trauma and emotional stuff got stuck. And there's another person out there that I really encourage everyone to look into, John Sarno, who he has a book called Healing Back Pain. He was this doctor that really pioneered mind body medicine in like the 70s before it was completely accepted. He was a doctor at a NYU rehabilitation program, and he was really one of the first major players to talk about like the mind body connection in modern medicine. And there's a book called Unlearn Your Pain that Howard Schubiner, who's another doctor who studied John Sarno's work, he wrote about. And he wrote about this work and how he has this program about unhealing or unlearning chronic pain, and how chronic pain is learned pain that your brain creates in response to emotionally traumatic events. And this is a little bit different than Joe. Joe takes it to another level of energy healing, using energy and the divine energy to heal things like cancer. Howard Schubiner is definitely more of like chronic condition, like chronic pain type thing. And I was reading his book, and for me, one of the things that he has you do is you go back and you look at very emotionally traumatic events in your life, and then you look at when you have symptoms that started. So when I did this, I was doing it as an exercise. I saw how the pelvic pain started with this kind of emotionally traumatic event of being like humiliated at work, essentially. And at the time, I had seen like 4 or 5 different pelvic floor physical therapists, which I didn't even know existed. I doctors, it was like my whole life. So again, I'd been consumed, all encompassing my whole life. And then when I realized, oh my God, I'm identifying with this illness again. And I realized that, okay, I have to shift gears here, because nothing I'm doing is helping. So it's just like 2011 again, but it was, luckily on a smaller scale. But there was a point where I was like, I can't live like this. This is so horribly painful. Something has to shift. So what I did is I stopped going to all my doctors. I stopped going to every physical therapist appointment, which again, I would not recommend, unless, if you have a condition that's like cancer and like you need treatment, like don't quit going to doctors, right?
Yeah.
Do your research first. But I quit identifying it. And then I used the TREs to help release that emotional, emotional pain. I did blessing of the energy centers like every night. And I healed this pain. It went away. And it was to the point where I couldn't even sit down. There were some days that were so bad I couldn't even sit. Because my pelvic floor was in so much spasm. And by the way, this is a real issue that women like don't talk about, but they should, because pelvic floor dysfunction is a real thing. Side note there, that's becoming more mainstream, which is great. But it was this amazing learning experience where like, wow, I let this emotional event get tied up in a physical condition. I identified with it, especially when it didn't get better right away. And it was that identification and constantly talking about it, constantly getting treatment for it, putting energy on it, that kept it there. When I removed all of that and then I used my tools, I have a big tool bucket now, used my tools, it went away. And I haven't had a problem ever since.
Well, when you look at us as a whole, and that's what people forget, they think, oh, it's just a body, it's just physical matter right here.
Yeah.
When you look at us as a whole, we're a bioenergetic field. I mean, there's so much around us that we can't even see, and it starts there. I mean,
Yeah.
we can't see it, we can't touch it, we don't know it's there, but it is there. And if we hold on to that and it gets stuck in our chakras, it gets stuck in our field, and then the body starts hurting, or something happens with our body. Yeah.
And it's very easy to forget that. And even still, like, I mean, I've known Joe since 2012, so 9 years, almost 9 years now. And it's still easy for me to I still get caught up. And my boyfriend's been wonderful. He's like, hey, 5D, he'll be like 5D. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, let me shift back. But it's easy to forget that because we get caught up in that we're just physical beings, but we're not
Well,
just
you're yeah, and being in the medical field that you are,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's a constant thing you have to listen to and be around all day long.
Yeah. So anyways, that's kind of my journey. Still a journey, right? I still, I'm still on the process, but those are some of the big things that I've learned. And really the biggest thing that I've personally found useful is that identification of whatever condition you have to stop identifying with it if you want to be something more. Because if you keep saying I'm a survivor or I have cancer or I have this, I have that, like it's never going to go away because you
Oh,
are
identify with what you want to become, right?
right.
Right.
Yeah. And part of that was for me is just not identifying as that previous thing. Like, I was proud to be a survivor of sexual assault. And I'm proud of that. Like I'm proud that I got through that and I've done advocacy work, but there for a very long time um I had to stop calling myself that like all the time because it was keeping me stuck in that identity that I didn't want to be in. Now I can say that and I'm fine. Like I don't have any more emotional reaction to it, but it's about creating that distance. And when you're distant enough and you can, and one of the things that Joe says is one of my favorite things is he says memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. And getting to that point where that memory doesn't have that emotional charge anymore is the healing, right? And for
Mhm.
me, especially with trauma, like that type of trauma, you have to get to that point of where like, oh, hey, I can tell this now and I don't have an emotional reaction to it. And that to me is signifying that I am in the process enough where I'm healed from this and I can talk about it and not create that energy. It's
Right.
not like I want to tell the details of everything that would happen. That's going to be hard no matter what, but I can tell part of the story, tell someone about what happened, and I don't have, it doesn't ruin my day. That's what would happen is I would tell this, it's like a, kind of a traumatic response. You tell a story of what this traumatic thing that happened to you, then
Mhm.
I'd be, anxious all day. That doesn't happen anymore. So when you get to that point of where, hey, you can tell what happened to you or you forget, like, with the pelvic stuff, like almost forgot about that. And I was reminded that like I posted in this group like 2 years ago, because it was 2 years ago that I healed it. And someone commented on it recently. And then all of a sudden I started getting these responses and I reread, kind of what I had written. I was like, oh, wow, it was really bad, but
Yeah.
it's great to get to the point where you forget, and then that means that you're removed enough from it. But you just always have to remember it's the identification that keeps you stuck. In my opinion, that's at least what I found.
And I remember when we first met you, you were going through this really bad like flu stuff. Yeah, I don't know if you had COVID or not, but
I probably did, yeah.
yeah, yeah, you probably did at that time, but you didn't identify with it and you got
Yeah.
over it, right?
Yeah, and COVID. So I potentially had COVID. I still think I did. Clinically, I had all the symptoms, and it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, and I think this happens in any like regular illness. There's always a point where you're like, oh my god, is this ever going to end? Because you're sick for like 24 hours. Regular flu,
Yeah.
right? You're like, oh my god, this is horrible. Like, what does it feel like to feel better again? And that's just part of the process of like you shouldn't like question that because like you're going to get better. But yeah, with the COVID, pretty sure my boyfriend and I had it clinically. We did. You were diagnosed like without a swab, but yeah, it was one of those things where it's like I didn't identify as having it of like, oh yeah, I survived COVID. I'm like, yeah, I was sick, like whatever, and I think that
Right.
I think that's also important too with any illness, right? Like,
Mhm.
and your emotional state when you're sick in general is going to kind of dictate how quickly you heal too.
Yeah, like if we had the flu, we'd be like, "Oh, I had the flu."
Yeah,
Nobody does
no one says that.
that.
And even with simple like and one thing that I work on is that I do very adventurous things with my body and I get injured. Like it's kind of inevitable. You're gonna roll an ankle or whatever. And one of my things that I still work on is my emotional reaction. Like when I injure myself is because I it's still one of the things I still work on is that I still have fear that it's going to be like it was like in 2009, right?
Right,
I get
right.
injured. And that's one thing that I have to work on very closely still is that if something happens, I have to step away from this is going to become a chronic thing. And my boyfriend points that out to me. He was like, cause I hurt my back. I strained my back. I was tired. It was just something that happened. I strained my low back a couple of months ago and I think I did a pretty good job, but like there was like a 24-hour to 48-hour period where I was a disaster And I was like completely freaking out because I still have this fear of, oh my God, what if it becomes chronic again? And
Mhm.
for me, that's my biggest goal is to break that, because normal people don't think that. You hurt something, you throw your back out. Normal people who don't have a trauma response to, or who don't have chronic conditions, aren't going to think like, oh my God, this is going to be forever. And that's for me, what I still have to work on is that I still have this fear because it was so bad.
Mhm.
And honestly, the experience with the chronic pain was probably far worse than my sexual trauma, just because I love doing stuff with my body, and that, I don't know. I guess I don't know why. Maybe, but that, I think because it was such a long process and there was so much unanswered questions initially, that there's still a lot of, I would say a lot of emotional charge, but there's still some emotional charge about that. More fear than anything. And that's something that I personally still have to work on, of not having that reaction. If I get injured, it's not the end of the
Mhm.
world. I'm doing gymnastics at age 30. Like, I'm gonna
Mhm.
probably roll an ankle, or do something, and it's about, again, shortening that refractory period, and that's still something that I'm working on.
Yeah, and but even somebody that doesn't have chronic conditions, if you feel something weird going on in your body, you're like, "Oh my god, is that am I having a heart attack?" And,
Right.
people do
And then you
that.
focus on it and you make it worse.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you how many patients I've come in that, think they have something and they have chest pain, and they focus on it and they make it worse. Or, I was telling
Mhm.
someone the other day, she was having a miscarriage, and she was saying her pain was like 10 out of 10, and she was very anxious. She was so worked up. And I was like, and if you get anxious, what's going to happen? Your body tenses up.
Mhm.
You create more fight or flight chemicals. You're going to be in more pain. So I told her, I was like, I was like, you really need to try to take some deep breaths, like calm yourself down, because this anxiety is making it worse. It's making the pain worse, because that's what happens. If you're in an anxious state, you're in fight or flight, you're going to have more pain because your body's tensing up as a traumatic reaction, right?
Yeah.
And you see that all the time, anxiety creating conditions, essentially, because you're so focused on something that it's growing, right?
You're
And
making it more than what it really
right.
is.
And that's just what the body does, is if you focus, on something, it's gonna grow. Wherever you put your attention, is that the energy is gonna go there, right? And like, you could focus on your toe and probably make it hurt, like, but if you don't think about it, it doesn't hurt. Or and I see that a lot in work too, when people are hyper focused. A lot of people come in with chest pain and they think they're having a heart attack. 80% of the time they're not, and it's just something that's not that it's created, but when you focus more attention on it, it's gonna seem more prominent than it actually is.
Yeah, and I know that for me, if something pops up now, I just kinda look at it and just realize that, "Oh, this is just a temporary thing. I don't know what it is. I don't wanna know what it is,
Yeah.
and it's gonna pass."
And
And
I
I
still have a
send
hard
it
time.
love, you know?
Yeah, and I personally, and that is my one,
I
probably,
don't label it. Don't label it.
and that's still one of my biggest sticking points, because I'm a labeler. I still label stuff, and I have to be very conscious of that. I'm very grateful that I have a wonderful boyfriend who is. I say, hey, call me out on that, because he's one that just naturally, he never. I didn't meet him at a workshop. He didn't know any of this stuff, but he kind of intuitively has done most of this stuff his whole life, in terms of, he has a goal. He broke his neck twice, his back twice. He was told he would never walk again, and he kind of did his own, what I call his own Dr. Joe stuff. And he says, he kind of was like, F that. He was in the military. He's like, F that, like, I'm gonna walk again and I'm gonna do sports. And he healed himself, essentially, like, with support, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
he had a vision and he focused on his vision. He didn't let anything else stop him, and he's really good at doing that. And he just has intuitively done that his whole life. And I'm like, and I've, been doing this for like 9 years, and I'm still learning, right? Like, teach me. So it's great because he is so good at that I can have him call me out. I'm like, hey, or if I have a question, I'm like, hey, like, have I been better lately? Or if I have I been talking about this? And he's like, yeah, you've been really great. Or like, no, you've been really negative the past 24 hours. And I think it's really important to have a relationship like that, where you
Yeah.
can have someone, because it is kind of hard to be aware sometimes, because if you're living in your own head all the time, it's hard to,
Mhm.
it's hard to take a step back and be that observer. So if you have someone in your life, it doesn't even, it's not a partner, it's a friend, and be like, hey, like, you need to watch your energy, or like what Joe did to me in 2016, like, hey, like, you need to watch your energy. It's so important to have people like that, because then you can shorten that refractory period, or just be aware of your own habits. And
Mhm.
I've noticed this, like, you in places that I've worked, it's so easy to get sucked into drama. Like a lot of medical professionals are dramatic, and being conscious of like, okay, I'm not going to get sucked into that because I don't want to be a part of that realm, and it's
Mhm.
just, again, it comes back to being aware of where you're putting your energy and how you're
Yeah.
presenting yourself to the world.
Yeah, because I know there's times where I kind of venture into trying to control things when I'm like anxious,
Yeah.
right? Or in fear.
Yeah,
And
totally.
then my wife will be like, did you meditate today? Did you she'll do it lightly, like, hey, why don't you go just don't do this, just go and
Yeah.
do something else, And then I'm like, oh yeah. It's nice to
Yeah.
have that extra person there to mirror back to
Oh
you
yeah,
what's going
absolutely.
on.
And I also think it's, for me too, it's been about having many different tools. And I have met people who are like, it's like, oh, Joe stuff didn't work for me, I'm a failure. I'm like, no, you just, you maybe need some more tools. Like I've used so many different things, and I'm going back to some of the limbic retraining stuff right now for, and we'll touch on this, but like COVID time has been an extremely difficult time for nurses. And I've
Hmm.
had myself a lot of, there's been a lot of anxiety and a lot of trouble sleeping because it's just been a very stressful time. So, for me, it's like not that I rotate through tools, but I have a big toolbox now, right? And there's so many things out there that are all in the same realm as, one avenue, that it's okay to explore other things, or to say like, hey, like I needed something else. I'm a huge advocate of Wim Hof breathing. I love Wim Hof, the Iceman.
Yeah,
The
I tried. I
way
I did that for a while. I haven't done it for a while now, but I was doing it for a couple
I
years.
like that different breathing, that Soma
Hmm.
breathing. I will say,
Oh, Soma's great too. Yeah.
don't combine Wim Hof breathing with Joe Dispenza breathing, because I passed out 3 times and I became a patient in my own ER. It's a
Oh
very funny
no.
story. I busted my face open. Don't do that. But breathing, different types of breathing, yoga, because yoga is mind body, and the limbic system retraining specifically. I rediscovering that, and how I'm realizing that for me personally, I still have some limbic system dysfunction that was never really dealt with. And I've had so many amazing experiences through these meditations that I've learned through Joe, like mystical experiences through the pineal gland meditations. But then I'm like, oh, I still have some things, like some basics. It's about going back to the basics. And
Hmm.
Joe has personally told me that many times. It's like, when you have something happen, go back to the basics, right? And for me, the basics is, what am I being? Like, what am I really being? What am I being to the world right now? Am I being negative? Am I identifying as a victim, or am I identifying as an injured person? What am I identifying as? And what has worked in the past? What are my basic tools? My basic tools were basic Dr. Joe meditations, because he's got a ton out there. But for me, basic ones, TREs,
Hmm.
breath work, and then limbic system work, which is very similar to a lot of the meditation stuff. But it's going back for
And
me.
even getting out, simple as getting out in nature.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm I'm on a travel nurse contract right now. We're right by the ocean. After a few rough shifts, we go and take a walk outside, and that's like a walking meditation for us.
Hmm.
And it's like, what is the basics that work for you? Because I love my mystical experience, I love my long meditations, but if I'm having a tough time in my day-to-day life, having that is not necessarily going to doing that is not necessarily going to be the best thing for me right now. Like, what do I need to do to undo the negativity that I'm perpetuating in my life?
Like walking barefoot on that sand,
Right.
letting
Yeah.
all that release, going into the earth,
Yeah.
just so many
Going
things.
back to the basics. And
Yeah.
again, what your basics are is unique to each person. And I have my basics, and I'm aware of what my basics are. But it's just being aware of that, of like, okay, I've spiraled down this like old self pathway for a little bit. What do I need to do to get back to my new self? And a
Hmm.
lot of that times it's just being simpler, and we complicate things. I mean, I do that. It's like, I can do my 4-hour meditation and have a
Who
mystical
has time for
experience.
that? No way.
Right. But then it's like, if I'm being, if I'm caught in fight or flight, like, what do I need to do to get out of that? So it's about finding, what is in your basic toolbox, and then what is in your extra toolbox, I guess.
So tell me a little bit. I saw a post on Facebook. You were talking about starting a exercise program. So tell me a little bit about that.
Oh yeah. I thought, yeah. So nursing is tough, and we were going to talk about this too. Is that it's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard having the knowledge and beliefs that I do in terms of mind body connection, and being a nurse, because a lot of what, or at least in the ER, I'm in the ER right now, a lot of what I see is people who just haven't taken care of themselves their whole lives. And Kaiser was wonderful because a lot of people are very healthy, and they're coming in for kidney stones or like, abdominal pain or like whatever. And it was a very different population. And I'm in California right now, and it's a very difficult population. And I miss, having people that value their health, and working with people that value who they are as a person and taking care of themselves prior to becoming sick. Because we have sick care. We don't really have health care anymore, right? We have sick care. And I wish we had a better society that advocated for, there's a lot of things that need to change, from socioeconomic status and having access to healthy foods and stuff like that. It's a whole lifelong process, right? But it's been tough because we see in COVID, we've seen a lot. What I've seen a lot of is the sickest people have been the ones that have had poor health their entire lives, and now we're seeing the pitfalls of unsafe staffing for nurses, hospitals over profit versus nurse safety, and not valuing the frontline workers. And there's a lot of burnout. So for me, there was a long time. So I have a BS in exercise science, and I, for a long time, because again, I had this identity of like, oh, I am an injured athlete. Like I didn't want to coach. I didn't want to, I couldn't do it because it was too painful for me mentally to be like, oh my gosh, like I can't do what they're doing anymore. And I don't want to do this. And I think probably in the past couple of years, one of the things that I found is that I had to stop identifying as an injured weightlifter. And that was what I still did, is like, because I was really good. My body still can't train the way that I wanted to be an elite weightlifter. Is that something that I want to do? Maybe, but I've come to the point where like one of my qualities was that I had to be the best at everything. It was a perfectionist thing, type A personality thing. I had to be the best. And one of the biggest challenges for me in this healing process was to let go of that idea that I don't have to be the best. Like in the grand scheme of things, that's not going to change who I am. I want to be an athlete because I love being an athlete, but there's a difference of wanting to be an athlete and having to be the best. And I've listened to so many like Olympians. Gymnastics is my life. I love it. I follow everything gymnastics. There's so many gymnasts. Allie Raisman is a wonderful human being. I highly encourage anyone to listen to her. She has a wonderful podcast that she talks about this, is that you get to this point of being the best and then you have nothing. You don't know who you are. So I realized that like, yes, it would be amazing to be the best at weightlifting, but like it doesn't have to be my whole life. So what's the journey, right? Appreciate the journey more. I'm starting to go back to more things that I love to do. I love weightlifting, but I quit everything because I thought I could be the best at weightlifting. And I enjoyed it, but I quit gymnastics, which was actually my true love. I loved the sport. So long story short, I feel like I'm finally at a place where, fitness is my passion again, but also sharing it with others is fun again, because it wasn't fun for me for a long time because I identified as this person who I can't do this anymore. But with COVID, especially with all the gyms shut down, a lot of people didn't know what to do. So what I would love to do is, create programs for people like that they can do on their own outside. I love working out outside. We're in Berkeley right now, and we've had amazing weather. Like, I'm so glad I'm not in Seattle right now. We've had sunshine like basically the entire winter, and Seattle would have been rain. And what I thought was like, well, I have the knowledge and the experience where I could create fitness programs for people. And a lot of people think they need a lot of equipment or they need a gym, and you really don't need much at all. So I was thinking, I haven't actually done this yet, but I was thinking, how cool would it be to create a fitness program for busy nurses or for people who can't afford to go to the gym? What can you utilize that's in your own backyard, or maybe a couple of free weights or something that you can do on your own that you don't need to go to a gym and pay money for.
Not that they're opening it anyway. Yeah.
No, some places, but not many. But and I've had so much fun doing that this past year, like working out outside and doing things that I normally wouldn't do because we didn't have access to a gym. Like I basically stopped weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. That's what I used to do. And mentally it was great because I stopped again identifying as this, injured athlete. And my body still does amazing things. So like what where I'm at right now in my healing, like what can I do that I love? And I've discovered Spartan racing, obstacle course racing, which is so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
And again, went down the pathway of like, oh, I have to be the best. And I was like, you know what? I don't. Like, I have a great time doing this. Gymnastics. There's an adult gymnastics world out there that I never even knew existed. And there's an Olympian who has two kids who is making a comeback. It's a 32-year-old mom. And it's inspired this whole group of adults who thought they had to quit gymnastics as kids because they weren't good or they were too old to come back. So it's inspiring people who you maybe don't think they have it in them to start an exercise program or do something. I would love to cater to that group of people of, hey, like you can do whatever you put your mind to, and let's work with what you have right now. Especially with COVID, I think it's, you've seen a lot of people that just stopped going to the gym because they didn't know what to do. Yeah, you have to get creative, but like you can do so much without a gym. So that's what I would love to, eventually maybe do that, create a program or something, but I haven't quite done it yet, but it's in my head at least. So
You're busy at the ER, I would imagine. So
oh yeah, just, 48 hours a day that I'm working. It's a lot.
48 hours a week.
Yeah, we're doing a crisis contract right now in California, and it's 48 hours a week. It's a little rough.
Yeah.
But that's why I go outside on my days off, and we're right by the ocean, so it's yeah, it's super. That's just been amazing, and it's, a couple hours on the by the ocean for me offsets the stress.
Oh yeah, it's that simple, right? It's so
Oh yeah,
simple, everybody. So simple. Just go
box
do
again.
stuff that you listen to music. I mean, it could be
Yep.
anything. Yeah. So this has been awesome, Rachel. Thank you so much for being on the show
Thank
and
you for having.
for sharing all the stuff that you've been through and realizing that you've worked through it all. I mean, that was a lot. That was
It's
a
a
lot
lot, and
that you had to go through,
I'm
and that
still,
look where you are now.
and it is amazing, and I still, like I said, I still
And
have
you got
so
to pat yourself on the back.
yeah, and and that's also important. And I know Joe talks about this too, is that you do have to celebrate where you are, right? And it's
Even
so
the little steps. Yeah.
little
Yeah.
steps. And like for me, it's so easy to get like so hard on myself, like, oh my God. And then that's why when someone commented on this post about my healing my pelvic pain and I reread it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that is a big deal, And I reread it, I was like, wow, that was really bad. And you do
The
need to
majority of people will get stuck in that, and they'll
right.
be like that the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and that is what we have to remember, is that we don't have to be that way. And
Hmm.
and I completely, in terms of like Western versus alternative practices, like I think it's so important to have, if you have like cancer or you're trying to heal yourself of cancer, like it's so important to have a doctor that you trust. Like I would never advocate anyone to just like stop chemo altogether, but like I was telling someone earlier, someone was messaging me, I said, if you have cancer and you're getting treatment, your state of being when you go into your treatments and your attitude is what's going to make or break your treatment, right? Because
Hmm.
there's a fascinating study even about chemotherapy and nausea associated with chemotherapy, where people will start to get nauseous on the way to chemo, and it's this associated response of like, this is going to be one way. And especially with scary illnesses like cancer, like you don't have to be the rule. Like if the rule is there's a 90% mortality rate, like tell yourself you're not going to be that, like, and is it going to be work? Yeah. Do you need Western medicine support? Like, yes, I would never tell someone with stage 4 cancer to like stop all treatment, but like
Yeah.
stop, don't identify with like, oh my God, I only have a 10% chance of survival, because you don't have to be that person.
Hmm.
You get to choose who you want to be. And I believe that, we have bigger purposes, and sometimes you're not meant to heal from something. And sometimes I still question, like, gosh, why do I have to go through all this? But there's some lesson in my life or something that I'm meant to do that made me have to go through all this. And part of it was
Hmm.
that I created it myself, but like, what I do is I try to take meaning of like, okay, this is not the life that I necessarily like had in store or had planned. But I try to believe that there's some better purpose, that maybe there's a reason that I'm going through this. And it's, even if it's to help somebody down the road, then that's doesn't make it all like peachy, but it'll be worth it in the end. And you get to choose how you show up, and how you respond to trauma and accidents and disease or whatever is really the determining factor in how you heal, essentially.
And it's all a gift. I mean, we
Yeah.
hate, it would be hard saying that to somebody who's like terminally ill
Right.
or this or that. And I don't want to put that out there like that, but um, we grow so much through the hard stuff, you
Yeah.
know?
And for me too, personally, like I know how and I would never ever say this to someone who has just been through a traumatic event, but I'm saying it to
Yeah.
myself.
Mhm.
I know that I created these because of like who I was being, and there's some sort of some statistic that if you're sexually assaulted once, you're like 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted again. Why is that? It's because we become this victim, right? You become afraid of everything. You become this fear, and what you put out there is what you're going to get back, and it makes so much sense now. So I for me, I know, because I've had a couple of, I actually didn't even talk about one of them, but I was sexually assaulted in 2011 as well. And so what happened, like because of who I became, in this fear and this victim state, I attracted more of that. And I would never say that to somebody who didn't understand this process, because it sounds like victim blaming, but it's more taking responsibility for your own energy. And it's not like, oh, it was my fault. That's not the same thing.
No.
I attracted the experience based on the energy that I was putting out. Was it my fault? No, but I think that's a really important, especially if you've had one traumatic experience. It's so important to break that cycle, because it's just going to keep happening, and until
Like
you
people
stop.
who keep getting in car accidents or keep,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Or in domestic violence relationships, like why do people keep entering these relationships?
Mhm.
It's about your own self-worth, and realizing that you can stop attracting this energy. Like there's something in your energy that you're attracting, and there's some pattern, because it's a pattern. And in Joe's, and that's why I always say Breaking the Habit is my favorite book with his, because he goes over the body's like addiction to its own patterns, and
And the patterns they run deep, and it's
they run very.
hard and it's difficult, and it's something that you have to work with every day. We're not saying that this is something you're going to change overnight.
No, and then
For real.
and then to take it to another level is, creation and manifesting. When you break that habit of whatever you want to be, if once you get to that point where like, hey, like let me create now, that takes it a step further. And
Well, everything that I did within those meditations, I created and it
yeah.
came into being.
Oh, I've had great manifestations,
Yeah.
fun things, silly
Hmm.
things,
Hmm.
and then you have fun with it, so you get to a point where, and I have to remind myself this too, is that healing and creating doesn't always have to be serious business, like because healing
Hmm.
a health condition is, you put a lot of pressure on yourself. But what I said earlier, my quickest healings and my quickest manifestations have happened when I it was lighthearted and fun. I mean, I've had some really fun manifestations that I've just, like literally an hour after I meditated on it, it happened, and
Hmm.
it's always, and that's fun. That's like, you can play, right? And that's important too. I think in the process is learn how to have fun with it, learn how to play, have fun with manifesting, create an object, like manifest an object that you think would be funny. And then it put stock in that bucket of like, okay, like I can do this, like the universe is responding to me. So
When people start looking for like a car, a specific color, or a specific car, then they see it everywhere.
yeah,
It's that same idea.
like
Yeah.
for me, a cardinal, that's my sign. And I worked on manifesting a cardinal for a long time. And then now I say, okay, when I say cardinal, that's my good luck chart. So it's all, it's all a process, but we have to have fun with it too. And I think it's so easy to forget that when you're healing from something big, how you
Yeah.
have to have fun and have the fun manifestations. I still do that. I have, fun visualizations that I do every day, just to add into the fun part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because otherwise we'll get stuck in thinking that we have to heal everything in our body all the time. And
Or
that's not fun.
trying too hard. And if you're trying,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you're not, if you're trying, you're separate from it, and that's not going to make it come any sooner. You have to just be, and you have to know. And that's hard. And it's still hard for me sometimes, but
Yeah.
that's, I think, an important lesson, that you have to just be and know.
Hmm. Hmm. So is there anything before we depart here, anything that you want to tell people, like a couple things that that people need to know in order to heal something, or to create something different in their life, like two main things that you want to put out there?
Yeah, I think, and actually saying this has really helped, remind me. Be conscious of who you're being, how you're identifying. I think that is the single most important thing that's been helpful for me. Who are you being? Not what are you saying. Not what are you telling people? Who are you being in your head? Who are you telling yourself you are? If you're telling yourself I have cancer, I'm a cancer survivor, that's all you're going to keep getting. You have to change your own narrative. That's number one. And then number two is don't use just one tool, use all the tools that you can learn. Don't like, there is a pattern that I feel like people who are searching for healing, they'll like start something and like, oh, it's not good, I have to find the next one. And that's not what I'm talking about. But do research, use different techniques. You don't have to use just one type of meditation. Do different breathing. Like there's so many things out there that and I think sometimes people almost get like, oh, well, it didn't work for you, you're doing it wrong. Like, I don't like that mentality. Like, it's just a different way of thinking. Like, people heal in different ways, and
Mhm.
find what works for you, and have that toolbox of your basics. Like, what do I need? And I used to actually write this down. Like, if I'm having a day where I can't even get out of my own head, I had a piece of paper of like, what is like my top 10 things that I have to do, so have that list of like, what are your most basic things that you can do to change your state if you're having a day where you just cannot get out of, who you're being, and you want to get out of who you're being.
Some days we just need to sleep and eat.
Yeah.
That's it,
And if it's self-care, like having a
Yeah.
piece of chocolate or going for a walk, like, I'm a huge chocoholic. Like if
Yeah.
it's something like that, like have those things in your life that shift your energy without having a lot of effort. Because we're all going to have days where we're so wrapped up in ourselves that we can't see out of what we're feeling. So it's going back to those basics. I've recently found that watching videos of huskies makes me laugh. Like huskies are so funny. So my boyfriend will send, like, if I'm having a bad day, he'll send me husky videos or kitten video. Like some, and I was doing it for a while. I would watch every night. I would come home and I watch kitten videos because I've had, work is stressful.
Mhm.
So having stuff like that that's just simple, that can easily shift your energy, is so important when you can't seem to get out of your own head. So watch who you're being and who you're identifying as, and then have simple tools that you can resort to if you're having a difficult day. I think those are the two things that I would say are super, at least even right now, are super helpful.
Yeah, even if the meditation is 5 minutes in the morning or
Yeah.
whatever, it's so simple. Yeah.
Focus on your breathing, focus on your heart center, like focus,
Mhm.
take it away from the external and bring it back to you. And even if it's just 5 minutes, or, like I meditate on my lunch break. And it's not long, but it's something, because I work 12.5-hour shifts. It's something, even if it's just listening to chilled music,
Mhm.
something that brings you out of that state, that shifts your emotions easily, is super
And
important.
your limbic system, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rachel,
Thanks
so
so much
much.
for
This has
having
been so
me.
much fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna do, what if you do decide to get this program together, I'll make sure I put it in the notes
Oh,
below.
awesome. Yeah, for sure.
And what was the other thing? Oh, and then I also put down stuff for Dr. Joe, and then the trauma release exercises. I'll put links down there for everybody
Yeah, and
to
I
take a
can
look.
I can send you some of the other stuff that I've done too that's been helpful. So
Okay.
people have a lot of resources that they can check out and see what works for them.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
This has
Thanks
been
so much. It was so
awesome.
good to see you again.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.